when we broadcast last week, we hadn't had his clarifying statement in terms of the situation. But sadly, that clarifying statement has just led to more questions, to the extent that I read a press headline today that Michael Matheson did not lie despite not telling the truth. We've had Humza Yousaf and Shona Robeson apparently, allegedly not appearing on the BBC News programmes at the weekend because they were worried about they were going to get asked about this. We had Keith Brown on the BBC GMS programme saying he didn't expect to get asked about this because he was there to talk about Gaza. So the political context of this has not been anything other than unhelpful for the SNP. You asked the question what I would have done. Well, use that statement as a resignation statement. Because if he'd fallen on his sword, if he'd said, look, it was a genuine effort to protect my family, but I recognise I've done wrong and I have misled or I've not been fully comprehensive with the truth, then I think people would have forgotten about it by now, quite frankly. And actually, given that, as I said last week, Michael's a very diligent minister, I suspect he could have been back in government next spring at a reshuffle and nobody would have said boo to a goose. The result now for the SNP is that they've kind of lost a bit of moral authority on this. If there's any other situations like this going forward, which there inevitably will be in politics, whether it be at Westminster or Holyrood from the opposition, opponents will quickly turn around and say, well, sorry, your guy misled and didn't leave. So who are you to speak? Secondly, it's been a huge distraction. Andy rightly points out there's been some important votes and discussions on the situation in Gaza and Israel. We've got a budget, a UK budget today, and yet all we're talking about is this iPad. It's also calling into question Humza's leadership and judgment as well. And finally, I just don't understand if this is, from an SNP perspective, the best use of what little political capital they have just now. Far better, I think, to draw a line under it and move on. As I say, had Michael Matheson chosen to resign or had Humza invited him to leave government, I bet you we wouldn't even be talking about this by now. That's the nature of these types of stories. I do agree with Andy on the frivolous nature of these stories, but the SNP have only got themselves to blame, I'm afraid.